When we picture serial killers, we usually think of ruthless, cold-blooded men, but sometimes, the most terrifying monsters hide behind a woman's face. Mothers, nurses, grandmothers, trusted faces masking deadly secrets. In this chilling countdown, we reveal history's most notorious female serial killers, their twisted motives, horrifying crimes, and shocking confessions. Prepare yourself. The truth will haunt you. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Case 1. Eileen Wuornos, born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Eileen Carol Wuornos endured a childhood steeped in tragedy, violence, and abandonment. Her early life was a chaotic saga of instability. Her father, a convicted child molester, ended his life in prison before she was born. Her mother, incapable of raising 2 children alone, abandoned Eileen and her brother Keith when she was just 4 years old, left to the care of their grandparents. Eileen's young life spiraled further into misery. Her grandfather was abusive, physically punishing her frequently, while her grandmother remained distant, detached, and cold by her teenage years. Eileen had become increasingly rebellious, turning to alcohol and drugs. At 15, she was forced to leave her grandparents' home and began surviving through prostitution, theft, and petty crimes. This path paved the way for the brutal violence that would define her future. In the late 1980s, Wuornos drifted through Florida highways, eking out a precarious existence through prostitution, hitchhiking, and small-time criminality. But between November 1989 and November 1990, her pattern took a horrifying shift, one that would leave 7 men dead and cement her name into American criminal history. Wuornos' modus operandi was chillingly calculated. She would pose as a vulnerable hitchhiker or sex worker, carefully selecting men traveling alone. Once isolated, she attacked swiftly and lethally. Her weapon of choice was a .22 caliber pistol, small enough to conceal but devastatingly effective at close range. She shot each victim multiple times, callously discarding their bodies along highways and secluded wooded areas, and taking their valuables and vehicles. Her killing spree claimed the lives of 7 men: Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. Investigators struggled initially to link the murders due to the transient nature of the crimes and Wuornos' nomadic lifestyle. However, the discovery of victim Peter Seams' abandoned car, with Wuornos' palm print inside, became the critical piece of evidence that led authorities directly to her. Wuornos was arrested on January 9, 1991, at a biker bar in Volusia County, Florida. During her interrogation, she confessed to murdering the 7 men, claiming they had all attempted to assault her. Yet her inconsistent accounts and the forensic evidence painted a starkly different narrative, a picture of cold-blooded murder driven by financial gain and deep-seated rage toward men. The trials began in January 1992. Courtroom observers were shocked by Wuornos' defiant attitude and disturbing lack of remorse. Her chilling courtroom outbursts and declarations became infamous. During one unsettling moment, she stared directly at the jury and coldly stated, "I robbed them, and I killed them as cold as ice. And I'd do it again, too. There's no chance of keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this 'she's crazy' stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." The prosecution painted her crimes as deliberate, premeditated acts motivated by greed, rage, and hatred toward men. Her defense team desperately tried to argue that a lifetime of abuse, trauma, and exploitation had pushed her toward insanity and violence. But in the face of overwhelming evidence, the jury delivered their verdict decisively. Eileen Wuornos was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, sealing her fate as one of America's most infamous killers. The sentence was carried out on October 9, 2002 at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida, in her final moments, strapped to the execution gurney. Warnos's unsettling final words sent chills through the witnesses present. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day. With Jesus June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." Then, at precisely 9:47 a.m., the lethal injection took effect, and Warnos took her last breath. America's first widely recognized female serial killer was pronounced dead, leaving behind a legacy of horror, controversy, and disturbing fascination. Warnos's story remains deeply troubling, highlighting the devastating effects that childhood abuse and trauma can have upon the human psyche. But above all, her crimes are a sobering reminder that violence knows no gender. Beneath the surface of the woman who society rejected, a brutal killer emerged, a woman who forever changed the perception of serial killers in the United States. Case 2. Dorothea Puente. Dorothea Helen Puente was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. On the surface, Puente appeared as a gentle, harmless elderly woman, the ideal grandmother figure, someone you might see tending a garden or baking cookies. But beneath this facade of kindness and compassion lurked one of America's most calculating and ruthless female serial killers. Puente's childhood was anything but idyllic. Her parents, both alcoholic and neglectful, passed away when she was still young, leaving her orphaned by age 10, moving between foster homes. She learned early the survival skills of manipulation, deception, and theft by adulthood. Dorothea had cultivated an unsettling blend of charisma and cunning. She married multiple times, each relationship marked by instability, fraud, and criminality. In the early 1980s, Puente established herself as the trusted proprietor of a seemingly warm and welcoming boarding house located at 1426 F Street, Sacramento, California. She catered specifically to vulnerable elderly tenants and disabled individuals, many of whom were receiving Social Security or disability checks for the residents. Puente seemed to offer stability, kindness, and care in their final years. Tragically, reality was far darker. Between 1982 and 1988, Puente systematically murdered at least 9 of her tenants. Her chilling motivation was financial greed specifically, the desire to appropriate their government assistance checks. The manner in which she executed her crimes was methodical and deeply sinister. Puente would start by carefully choosing vulnerable individuals without close family ties or friends who would notice their disappearance. She subtly drugged her victims with lethal combinations of sleeping pills and tranquilizers, quietly administered through food or beverages, once unconscious or incapacitated. The victims succumbed, often quietly and without a struggle. But what made Puente's crimes uniquely chilling was her disturbing choice of how to conceal her acts. Rather than removing her victims' bodies to distant locations, Puente callously buried the remains beneath her own backyard garden. Meticulously, she arranged flower beds and vegetable patches above their shallow graves. The bright flowers blooming atop concealed horrors beneath. The boarding house became, quite literally, a death house, hiding its grim secrets mere inches beneath a picturesque surface. The disappearance of tenant Alberto Montoya, a man with schizophrenia, became the tipping point for authorities. In November of 1988, after receiving concerns from a social worker, Sacramento police officers visited Puente's boarding house to investigate. Initially, Dorothea skillfully maintained her composure, offering polite smiles, assurances, and cups of coffee, seemingly unperturbed. She even granted police officers permission to search the property, apparently confident they would find nothing incriminating. However, as investigators dug into the meticulously maintained garden, the grim truth quickly surfaced. Human remains emerged from the soft, disturbed soil, one after another. Ultimately, authorities uncovered 7 distinct bodies buried in the backyard. Further investigation revealed at least 2 additional victims linked to Puente's murderous actions, bringing her confirmed victim count to 9. In court, Puente portrayed herself as a frail, elderly woman incapable of committing such heinous acts. However, prosecution evidence overwhelmingly established her guilt, financial records showing fraudulent cashing of the victim's Social Security checks, witness testimonies of her manipulative tactics, and forensic proof of drugging and poisoning throughout the trial. Puente maintained a chillingly calm demeanor, rarely showing emotion or remorse, her pale blue eyes remaining eerily indifferent. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case was Puente's steadfast denial of responsibility. Even as witnesses described the horrific discoveries beneath her backyard, Puente maintained an unsettling calm. Asked in court if she killed her tenants, she coldly and simply replied, "I cashed their checks. Yes, but I never harmed anyone." This unwavering denial of guilt, despite overwhelming evidence, added a disturbing psychological dimension to her criminal profile, suggesting a deeply ingrained capacity for dissociation and manipulation. On December 10, 1993, Dorothea Puente was found guilty of multiple murders and received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She narrowly avoided the death penalty, due largely to her advanced age and outwardly non-threatening appearance. She served her sentence at Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where she remained quietly defiant until her death on March 27, 2011, at age 82. Dorothea Puente's case remains profoundly unsettling, a stark reminder that evil can wear a benign, grandmotherly face. Her murders shook public perception, challenging assumptions about vulnerability, trust, and deception. In a haunting final detail, the boarding house at 1426 F Street still stands, a silent, chilling testament to the twisted legacy of the woman known forever as the Death House landlady. Case 3. Nanny Doss, born Nancy Hazel on November 4, 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. Nanny Doss appeared outwardly as a cheerful, affable woman with an infectious laugh, an image so convincingly wholesome. Few suspected the chilling darkness beneath her jovial demeanor. Nicknamed the Giggling Granny, Nanny would later earn notoriety as one of America's most cold-blooded female serial killers, responsible for the murders of at least 11 people, most of whom were her own family members. Doss's childhood was marked by hardship and instability. She grew up in poverty under the domineering control of her strict father, James Hazel, who was both physically and emotionally abusive. Education was sporadic. Young Nanny spent her formative years working grueling hours on the family farm rather than attending school. At age 7, she sustained a traumatic head injury during a train journey a detailed psychologist later suggested may have contributed significantly to her future violent behavior and impaired impulse control. As Nanny grew older, her life became a series of turbulent marriages, 5 in total, each marred by dissatisfaction, abuse, betrayal, and bitterness. But beneath the seemingly tragic surface lay something far more sinister. Beginning in the 1920s and extending through 1954, a disturbing pattern emerged within Nanny's family circles. Husbands, children, grandchildren, siblings, and even her mother began to inexplicably fall ill and die suddenly. Investigators would later uncover that Nanny's chosen weapon was arsenic, a potent, virtually tasteless poison carefully mixed into the favorite foods and drinks of her victims. Meticulously hidden behind her charming smile and gentle manner, her methods ensured each death appeared as nothing more than unfortunate natural circumstances or tragic illness. The reality was starkly different. Nanny was systematically murdering those closest to her for financial gain, insurance money, or simply because she grew bored or irritated by their presence. The documented trail of death began with 2 of her daughters, whose passing in 1927 initially raised little suspicion, yet the cycle accelerated: husbands falling mysteriously ill, family members suddenly perishing. Her mother, Louisa Hazel, died in 1953 after Nanny cared for her during an illness, seemingly lovingly preparing meals and beverages that ultimately proved fatal. Her 4th husband, Richard Morton, fell victim the same year, and tragically, even her young grandson did not escape her cruelty. But it was the suspicious death of her 5th husband, Samuel Doss, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1954 that finally attracted the attention of authorities. Samuel's sudden demise following a meal raised significant concerns with his physician, who ordered an autopsy. The results were chillingly clear. Lethal traces of arsenic were found, prompting an immediate investigation into his seemingly devoted wife, Nanny. Upon her arrest in late 1954, investigators encountered a profoundly unsettling paradox. Rather than display fear, remorse, or sadness, Nanny consistently maintained her infamous sunny disposition during interrogations. She smiled warmly, laughed openly, and cheerfully confessed to poisoning multiple family members. Detectives were both horrified and perplexed at how casually she recounted her crimes, often punctuating each chilling detail with her eerie, trademark giggle. In a now infamous moment during police questioning, when asked why she committed these horrific murders, Nanny calmly smiled and replied with haunting nonchalance, "I was searching for the perfect mate, the real romance in life." Investigators concluded that Doss's motivations extended beyond financial greed. She exhibited clear signs of severe psychopathy, narcissistic manipulation, and a dangerously impaired sense of empathy. Her carefree, laughing demeanor represented a mask carefully cultivated to hide a deeply troubled psyche, twisted by lifelong dissatisfaction, resentment, and trauma. In May of 1955, Nanny Doss stood trial for the murder of Samuel Doss. Confronted with overwhelming forensic evidence and her own disturbingly cheerful confessions, she pled guilty. She received a life sentence in an Oklahoma penitentiary, narrowly avoiding the death penalty due primarily to her gender and outward charm. Although formally convicted for one murder, authorities believed firmly that she had poisoned at least 11 people over nearly 3 decades. Nanny spent the remainder of her life behind bars, serving her sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Even in prison, she maintained her unsettlingly jovial disposition, often engaging warmly and cheerfully with guards, fellow inmates, and prison staff. On June 2, 1965, she died from leukemia at age 59, taking the full extent of her terrible secrets with her. The chilling legacy of Nanny Doss, the giggling granny, persists today. Her case is often cited in criminal psychology literature, illustrating how effectively a psychopath can hide behind a seemingly harmless exterior. Her disturbingly calm confessions, laughter-filled accounts of brutal poisonings, and twisted pursuit of the perfect romance remain hauntingly etched in the annals of American criminal history, a sobering reminder that danger can lurk behind even the warmest of smiles. Case 4. Belle Gunness, born Brynhild Paulsdottir Storseth on November 11, 1859, in Selbu, Norway. Belle Gunness arrived in America in 1881, determined to build a prosperous new life. Settling initially in Chicago, Illinois, she quickly married her first husband, Mads Sorensen. From the outside, she seemed to have achieved the American dream, yet behind the pleasant facade of domestic tranquility lay a deeply sinister truth. Throughout the early years of her marriage, mysterious tragedies followed Belle with alarming frequency. Her Chicago confectionery business suspiciously burned down in 1898, providing her with a substantial insurance payout. In 1900, her husband, Mads Sorensen, suddenly and inexplicably died on the exact day 2 separate life insurance policies overlapped. Authorities at the time saw no immediate cause for suspicion, and Belle was awarded a sizable insurance settlement. Belle used this money to purchase a sprawling farm near LaPorte, Indiana, soon remarrying Peter Gunness in 1902, but within 8 months. Tragedy struck again as Peter died suddenly, this time due to a fatal skull injury. Despite suspicious circumstances, Belle evaded prosecution, maintaining a grieving widow's veneer convincingly enough to avoid suspicion from the community and authorities alike. From 1902 onward, Belle Gunness's farmhouse transformed into a horrific, calculated killing ground. Her chilling modus operandi involved placing matrimonial advertisements in various newspapers across the Midwest, enticing lonely, prosperous men to her isolated farm. Promising companionship, love, and marriage, Gunness lured numerous victims with the facade of a stable, nurturing partner, a tragic deception that proved lethal. Each suitor who responded was instructed to bring all their wealth and belongings to LaPorte, with Gunness assuring them they would build a prosperous life together upon their arrival. These hopeful men swiftly disappeared, never to be seen alive again. Gunness's method was ruthless and methodical, often poisoning her victims or brutally killing them with axes or blunt instruments as they slept. The bodies of her victims were then grotesquely dismembered and buried throughout her property, often beneath her pig pen or shallow graves in her orchard. Bell's ruthless reign of murder was finally uncovered in April 1908, triggered by a suspicious fire that razed her farmhouse to the ground. In the smoldering ruins, investigators found the charred remains of several children, presumed to be Bell's own, along with a decapitated female body initially believed to be Gunness herself. But as authorities explored deeper, their horror intensified. Dozens of dismembered human remains surfaced. Hidden across her land, carefully buried evidence of monstrous crimes. The exact number of Belle Gunness's victims remains uncertain, though authorities confidently attribute at least 14 deaths to her. Some historians, however, suggest the total victim count may reach as high as 40 individuals, based on various reports and testimonials from relatives of missing men who visited her farm. Perhaps the most chilling twist in this macabre case is the lingering doubt regarding Gunness's fate. The headless female corpse discovered at the scene was never definitively identified as Belle. Investigators suspected that Gunness, sensing imminent exposure, staged her own death by planting another woman's body in her place. Sightings and rumors persisted for decades afterward, suggesting Gunness had fled and continued her murderous schemes under new identities. One particularly haunting aspect of her case was the cold precision and meticulous organization she demonstrated. Belle kept detailed records, corresponded methodically with her victims, and maintained her fraudulent marital advertisements until mere days before the farmhouse burned down. Psychologists and criminologists later described her as a classic psychopath, calculating, manipulative, completely devoid of empathy, capable of brutal violence hidden behind a charming mask. To this day, Belle Gunness remains one of America's most notorious female serial killers, known popularly as the Black Widow of Indiana, due to her habit of luring and murdering male victims for financial gain. Her case has become a disturbing benchmark for criminal psychology and law enforcement training, vividly demonstrating how lethal violence can lie hidden behind a carefully crafted facade of normalcy. The Gunness farm murders shattered the early 20th century public perception of female criminality. Belle Gunness, with her chilling duality as a seemingly loving mother and ruthless predator, proved that evil knows no gender boundaries. Her dark legacy endures as a disturbing cautionary tale, a grim reminder of how deceptive appearances can truly be. Case 5. Jane Toppin, born Honora Kelly in 1857, Boston, Massachusetts. The woman who would later become known as Jane Toppin experienced a childhood riddled with trauma, abandonment, and neglect, following the tragic death of her mother, and with a father increasingly incapacitated by alcoholism and mental instability. Young Honora and her sister were placed into an orphanage. Adopted later by the Toppin family, she assumed the name Jane Toppin, beginning her troubled path toward infamy. From the outside, Jane presented herself as a cheerful, sociable young woman, affectionately nicknamed Jolly Jane by friends and colleagues. Yet beneath this seemingly affable exterior lurked a deeply disturbed and profoundly lethal persona. By her late 20s, Jane had enrolled at Cambridge Hospital's nursing school in Massachusetts, where her murderous compulsions soon began to take shape. Between 1887 and 1901, Jane Toppin systematically murdered at least 31 victims, primarily vulnerable patients entrusted to her care, including several personal acquaintances. Driven by a twisted compulsion, Jane's murders represented one of the most chilling manifestations of caregiver violence ever documented. Jane Toppin's modus operandi was terrifyingly methodical. Utilizing her privileged position as a trusted caregiver, she would administer precise and lethal combinations of morphine and atropine, powerful, controlled substances available to her as a nurse, with frighteningly calculated intent. Toppin meticulously adjusted dosages, prolonging her victims' suffering, often holding them as they slipped in and out of consciousness. Disturbingly, she later confessed that this gave her an intense sense of excitement, control, and gratification, describing in chilling detail how she derived deep psychological pleasure from observing patients as they succumbed slowly to death. Her capacity for manipulation and deception was profound. In the eyes of doctors, colleagues, and families of the deceased, Toppin was perceived as a kind, competent nurse, often praised for her compassionate bedside manner, Her deceptive charm and reassuring demeanor effectively masked the horrific reality beneath. But suspicion began to close in by 1901, particularly with the mysterious death of Maddie Davis, a personal acquaintance of Toppin's. Maddie's surviving family members became increasingly skeptical of the circumstances surrounding her sudden illness and death, when other members of the Davis family, whom Jane had cared for, began falling ill or dying mysteriously. Authorities were finally alerted. An extensive investigation uncovered Toppin's horrifying trail of murder, deceit, and manipulation. Arrested in October 1901, Jane Toppin initially protested her innocence, confidently maintaining her cheerful, benevolent facade. But confronted with damning medical and forensic evidence, including traces of poisons in victims' bodies, her mask soon crumbled. She admitted candidly to investigators, without apparent remorse, that she had poisoned multiple patients and acquaintances over a 14-year period. Her confession sent shockwaves through the medical community, raising deeply disturbing questions about patient safety and the ease with which caregivers could conceal malevolent intentions behind positions of authority. Most disturbingly, during interrogations, Jane chillingly revealed that her ultimate ambition had been to kill more helpless people than any other man or woman who ever lived. In June 1902, Jane Toppin stood trial, charged with multiple murders, due to the grotesque nature of her crimes and the disturbing psychological motivations behind them. Doctors and psychiatrists examined her extensively, diagnosed with profound mental illness, including homicidal mania and psychopathic tendencies. She was declared criminally insane. Thus, rather than receiving the death penalty or life imprisonment, Toppin was committed indefinitely to the Taunton Insane Hospital in Massachusetts. Even within the asylum walls, her twisted psychology continued to fascinate and horrify medical professionals and criminal psychologists alike. She spent the remainder of her life institutionalized, passing away quietly and without fanfare on August 17, 1938, at age 81. Jane Toppin's legacy remains hauntingly significant in American criminal history, representing a deeply troubling intersection between caregiver roles and pathological violence. Her case forced dramatic changes in hospital practices, oversight, and procedures, profoundly reshaping trust in medical professionals and caregiving roles. Dubbed by historians as one of the most sinister female serial killers America has ever seen, her chilling confession and the sheer brutality of her actions remain a stark reminder of the capacity for human cruelty concealed behind the most trustworthy and cheerful of faces. These 5 notorious female serial killers, Eileen Wuornos, Dorothea Puente, Nanny Doss, Belle Gunness, and Jane Toppin, committed some of the darkest crimes ever recorded, each hiding brutal violence behind a carefully crafted mask of trust and innocence. But the question remains, who was the most dangerous killer in today's chilling countdown? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more true crime stories that will haunt your thoughts. Remember, evil doesn't always look evil. It often smiles. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and thank you for watching.